All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us at this webinar. I'm Derry from Honeycomb Consulting Skills Training, and I'm delighted to have a special guest, Daniel, with me today. I'll introduce Daniel in a moment. This is a bit experimental, so thank you all for being part of our experiment here. We are going live on LinkedIn, we're going live on X, we're going live on YouTube, as well as talking to those of you who've joined through StreamYard. So thank you for that. It would be very helpful if someone would just drop a comment in and just confirm that you can see and hear us and that the comment sections are working okay. Would appreciate that. I'm just going to introduce Daniel, who's here. So Daniel is a professor of management at the University of York and is also, let me just check what people have said. You can see and hear. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. So Daniel is a professor of management at the University of York. He's also an academic fellow of the International Council of Management Consulting Institutions. He's a general editor of the Journal of Management Studies, and he was part of the team who set up the Management Consulting Journal. So in a nutshell, Daniel is an academic who's done loads of research into professional services in general, consulting industry specifically, and broadly, he's an expert in all of the things that we all have stories and anecdotes and talk about all the time. So Daniel, welcome. Really glad to have you here.
Thank you, Derry. Thank you. So I hope I can live to expectations.
I'm very interested to dive into your research. So the reason that I really wanted to talk to Daniel was he published an article in the Harvard Business Review recently entitled "Hiring a Superstar Can Backfire," and that the research behind that article was quoted in The Economist recently as well. And it just really caught my eye because I'm sure this is true. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. Like, I've seen a lot of senior hires in consulting backfire and just not work. Whether that's the rainmaker who comes in from a big four firm to join a boutique and thinks that all their clients are going to come with them, and actually their pipeline ends up bone dry for 12, 18, 24 months. I've actually seen people quit their new firm because of that, just out of the embarrassment of not being able to bring the work in. And actually, I would almost say more often than not, a senior hire doesn't work out that well. And one of the reasons that I found Daniel's take on it really interesting was I've always thought about that through the perspective of the individual senior hire and the person coming in and not doing that well, not being successful in their new role for whatever reason. Daniel's research actually also looks at it through the perspective of how does the team that person has joined perform? And I genuinely had never thought about it from that angle before. So it's quite eye-opening to see that and to understand the kind of robust richness of the data that kind of sits behind that. So what we are going to do today is Daniel's going to take us through some of that research for 15, 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to have an open Q&A. I've got a bunch of questions for him. I would love you guys to ask your questions as well. So please do share your questions in the comments. We can bring them up and we can talk to them as they come through. Get what you want out of this session. And so I'm going to hand over to Daniel in a second. And just the final thing from me, anyone here that's new to Honeycomb Consulting Skills Training, we help consulting team leaders develop exceptional teams. And one of the ways we do that is sharing conversations like this with experts like Daniel, who can shed a light on the consulting industry and particularly topics like building teams, hiring stars, and making that all work. So great to be here. Great to dive into the conversation. Daniel, I'm going to hand over to you and you can take us through your research and your findings.
Sure. Thank you, Derry. Very, very happy to be here. It's very important for us academics to discuss our findings with practitioners and to see whether these things resonate. So we're not really working on an ivory tower or in a crystal ball. So I'm very happy and excited to be here. I think it's a perennial, well, not perennial, but it's a long-lasting question in business and management studies on whether you can buy quality. Can you buy quality? Can you buy performance? Can you improve the quality of a team, group, organization through the strategic hire of high quality talent. This is the premise behind talent management as a field. It's also the premise behind what we call the STARS literature. And what I wanted to do today was to report the findings of a quantitative study that me and my colleagues have conducted recently, which looks at this question: can you buy quality through by hiring stars? When may this work? When may not work as well? Now, just a bit of a premises. Our findings are based on a study of the legal profession in England and Wales. However, we believe that they are generalizable across professional services, or at least across many different types of professional services. There are similar studies with similar findings in investment banking, in equity with equity analysts, in scientists and academia, and there is a separate conversation in sports management, obviously. I haven't found anything specifically on management consultancy, and it may be that's data availability, but you can later tell me whether this resonates and whether you think it may apply, and whether there are some nuances that we should take into account. So over the last 20 years, large UK or English and Welsh law firms, more specifically, have been increasingly trying to hire top talent from their competitors. This is a practice known as lateral hiring. It was a marginal practice before the turn of the new millennium. But in the last 20 years, it's a very, very established business strategy for these firms. Now, every week you will find in the legal press examples of law firms of all status poaching teams, partners, sometimes all departments from their competitors. If we look at the United States, where this practice goes back even further, we have some quite solid quantitative data. If we look at the top 200 law firms in America, there are about 2,750 such moves every year, with the majority of firms in the top 200 engaging in multiple instances of lateral hire every year. Now, this is also a quite expensive, it's a big deal. This is an expensive practice. On average, people calculate that one lateral hire in the States is worth about $4 million in expenses. That's the salary costs of the new hire. Obviously, these people move for a very high wage, a guaranteed salary, guaranteed bonuses, and of course, the costs of the search process and recruitment process. What I'm not counting here is the disruption costs that may follow the hire. So the real costs may be even higher. So this is a big deal. And on the surface, it's quite obvious. It's obvious that if you've got a great team and you had the new talent, you become even better. Or if you have an average team, one of the fastest way of recruiting it is by injecting new star resources. We can have the next slide, please, Larry. Yet, there's a very vast record of media and academic sources which are somewhat skeptical. There's loads of studies, some anecdotal, some based on rigorous methodologies, which cast some doubts on this practice. And this is very much the background to our study. And the reality is that there can be reasons, theoretically, there can be reasons why hiring a star should work, as well as reasons why it shouldn't. And I want to give you a review rapidly of these arguments. It might be that some of these resonate with you anyway. These may be things that you've observed or you have thought about before. Why should it be a good thing? Let's start with the case for hiring a star. Well, stars have higher levels of skills, competence, and knowledge. This is essential in professional services firms, which are knowledge-intensive businesses, which compete on the basis of the knowledge and skills of the workforce. So the argument goes that by bringing a star who has higher levels of skills and knowledge, this makes a positive contribution to the knowledge base of the firm. It adds to the capabilities of the firm, allowing it to do more and better things, which it then can sell to clients. Another kind of argument is that stars are not just more knowledgeable and better, but they're more productive. They may have better routines, better ways of working, and as such, as they become role models, as they collaborate with your existing staff, they help to raise the level. So they have a positive impact on the productivity and the efficiency of the firm that they join. Another argument which draws on social capital: stars are well connected. They are well connected to other stars. Stars tend to hang out together in many ways in the same circles. They are known to top clients, to regulators, to investors, depending on your sector. And therefore, they bring with them a big book of contacts, and they allow the firm to access new opportunities by opening new contact lines to important stakeholders. Finally, there is a reputation signaling argument. Stars are known, they're highly visible. When stars move, as I talked to you before, the press reports on it. It's big news, it's industry news, it's market news. So people notice. So they help to raise the profile of a firm. If a star moves to a firm, it means that a firm is either better than what people thought, because otherwise a star wouldn't move there, or it's going to get a lot better as a result of the star moving there. And this helps the firm to attract better resources. So this gives a market signal which pushes all the stakeholders, whether these are clients, funders, whether these are prospective employees, and it makes the firm more popular with them. So it has a positive halo effect. But obviously, there's the other side of the medal too. There are, in the literature, a range of arguments which suggests that hiring stars may not work or may be a bad idea. First, we tend to ascribe the performance of a star, prima facie, to superior individual ability. But is it really so? In reality, we know that individual performance is often collectively supported. Stars depend on the superior performance on the support networks in the firm. This may be other stars and other colleagues. It could be junior colleagues that work with them very effectively. It could be secretarial and clerical staff. It could be systems, cultures, processes. It could be things which are located either in others within the firm or at the organizational level. Now, the issue is that when a star moves, the support network does not move with them. So this limits the portability of the superior performance. So what may happen is that when a star moves, they are not able to replicate the same star performance that they had in the original firm. So there's a limit, perhaps, to the portability of star performance. Secondly, and importantly for our argument here, stars and recruiting stars is disruptive. And this is articulated on a number of levels. First of all, stars are less willing to adjust. They are stars after all. You've hired them because they're stars. So why should they change? I'm not saying that all stars are reluctant to change, but there is certainly evidence in psychological studies of this kind of attitude. Why would you abandon old ways that made you a star in the first place? Second point is that stars crowd others out. When you bring in a star in a firm, they suck attention and resources from the firm, and they leave less room for others to shine. Thirdly, they cause anxiety and resistance amongst existing staff. Other people may think, following from the point above, that there are less opportunities for them. Especially in the context where we are talking of partners. These are people who have become owners of a firm. Your associates that may have been working to become partners over a decade or so may feel a little bit aggrieved if you are taking away a partnership slot and giving it to an outsider. Your own stars or non-star or your own talent may feel that this is a negative indictment towards your faith in their own abilities. All of this leads your incumbents, so existing people, to perhaps display negative types of behavior, to be defensive and not to collaborate with the stars by not sharing contacts, not sharing local knowledge, and so on, which makes it harder for the firm to capture the value of the move in the first place. So as you can see, we've got very solid sets of arguments, which are quite logical, some of them backed by evidence and research, both for and against hiring a star. So theoretically, we could say that every star hire is a bit of a balancing effect. It's a bit of a seesaw. You can see a seesaw here. There are negative and there are positive forces. On the negative side, we have the disruption. Hiring a star is always disruptive for the reasons that we talked about. But hiring a star also brings synergies with them. Access to new contacts that your firm may gain, more visibility in the industry, better skills and better productive routines, which may help others to work more effectively. So whether the move is successful or not, or how successful it is or isn't, depends on the precise balance between these negative and positive factors, between disruption and synergy. So on the basis of this, we've developed in our study a set of hypotheses. I have written these in the way in which they appear in the academic paper, which obviously is written in an academic language. It has to be, because it has to be technically sound and in line with exactly what we did methodologically. But I will translate this for you in a more approachable style. So the first hypothesis, we don't really know whether hiring a star is positive or negative. It can be both. So our first hypothesis is open-ended. Basically, hiring a star into a group is associated with that group being perceived as higher or lower. So both possibilities are open here in quality compared to firms that did not hire a star. So that's our baseline hypothesis, and it's open to both outcomes. So hiring a star can be good or can be bad for the perceived quality of the group. The second hypothesis postulates, in simple terms, that teams of stars, high-quality teams that have other stars and bright stars, ideally, in them, get better results from hiring another star. Whatever the effect of hiring a star is, it will be better if the team hiring a star is already composed by other stars. It's a high-quality group in terms of its composition. Our third hypothesis looks at the relative standing of the team within the broader organization. In particular, high-performing teams, which rank amongst the best in the whole organization, will get better results from hiring stars. So the stronger is the team relative to other teams in the firm as a whole, the better will be the result of hiring a star. So these are our hypotheses. And in order to test these, we conducted a 17-year-old longitudinal study. Our data set includes 100 law firms and 3,000 star lawyers, and there are several hundreds moves, so stars moving firms. Both individual lawyers and teams, which are known as practice areas here, are ranked in terms of the quality by Chambers Guide. This is a rigorous ranking classification, and it's a big deal for firms and lawyers to feature in the Chambers Guide. So it's a really important resource, and it's really rigorously compiled every year on the basis of a rigorous methodology. And this ranks both groups and individuals, as I said, and it allows us to establish whether they're stars or not and how much of a star they are. Not all stars are equal yet. And what we did, we looked at the impact in terms of Chambers rankings of a new star hire on the practice group that they joined. So following the move of a star from one firm to another, specifically from one practice group in a firm to the practice group of another firm, we looked at what impact this has on the rating of the practice group, i.e. the team that they joined. And one important thing to realize here is our design is relative. We are comparing the effect of hiring a star relative to similar groups that did not hire a star. So we're looking at a relative effect. It's a relative type of performance. So if we can move to our results, hypothesis one. I said before that we were open to both sets of results. Could be positive, it could be negative. It actually is negative. So hiring a star leads to a 9% reduction in the first year relative to similar teams, i.e. teams that have the same characteristics, the same and the same ranking, usually, that did not hire a star in that year. Hypothesis two is proven. So we show that this negative effect, this minus 9%, is reduced, i.e. improved, by up to 74%. So it doesn't turn positive, but quite turns positive in cases in which the hiring group is high quality, has high quality incumbents, which usually means having lots of other stars. Hypothesis three also is proven. This negative effect of hiring a star, this minus 9%, is reduced by 162%. So it turns positive in situations in which the star joins one of the strongest groups in the organization. So our findings, and of course, there's an interaction effect. You can sum hypothesis 2 and 3. The really good situations is when you have a group of other stars, which also is in terms of performance the best in the organization, and then you have a really strong positive effect. I think we're on the last slide, almost. Yes. So what does this mean? Hiring stars always causes a mix of disruption and opportunity, synergies. And what we do, we identify a series of conditions which make it more likely that the balance will tilt towards the latter, i.e., the opportunities, the synergies will outweigh the disruption. But important is that both are always present. Even in negative cases, you have synergies. Positive cases, you also have disruption. So hiring stars, our first observation, hiring a star has to be approached with great care because often it does not work as hoped. But there are certain things that you can do to minimize the negative effect and maximize the possibility of this working. Firstly, hiring stars works better when you already have other stars in that group, as long as the new star is not better than the average stars you already have. But groups of stars, constellations of stars, tend to work better and tend to be better at absorbing new star talent. The hiring group must be one of the best in the organization. And this means that stars work better in consolidating existing excellence rather than in creating new excellences. You can't really lift an average group from hiring stars, but you can consolidate the performance of your top groups, which already have star performance in them. I didn't present the data on this, but we did look at trajectories, and we found that when groups have a declining trajectory, i.e. when the rankings go down, they are much more likely to try to hire stars. Makes sense, doesn't it? You got a declining performance, you try and do something about it. It's a terrible mistake. In those situations, you cannot reverse decline. And hiring new stars in a declining group usually makes the situation worse. So you cannot recover declining performance through star hires. Now, this is a statistical study. We look at some antecedents which help us to understand when stars may or may not work. However, one thing that's important, we haven't really looked at this in a systematic way, but we've conducted interviews. In all situations, organizations can actually take active steps in terms of HR policies, in terms of HR practices, to improve the chances, even when the odds are stacked against them. There are certain things that firms can do to improve the chances of having a successful hire. And I think this is where I stop, because I really want to hear what you have to think about it and how you can reflect on this on the basis of your own experience.
Awesome, super interesting, Daniel. Thank you so much. I've got so many questions, but
thank you.
I for those watching, wherever you're watching through, I would love just to hear your reflections on whether that resonates with you, fits with your experience, and please do throw your questions in as well. I can see a few comments that I'll pick up, but this is your opportunity to sort of dig into this and what it really means and what you can do about it with Daniel over the next half an hour or so. So please do bring your questions in. But one thing I just wanted to kind of play back an implication of that initial data and just check that I'm understanding this correctly, Daniel. So you've got, across all of the firms that you studied, nearly 100 plus firms, nearly 3,000 lawyers and hundreds of moves within that 17 years. Across all of them, the average was, so I just saw Mark's comment, never tried to hire a star, but not in a rush to do so now. I can understand that. So across all of those, the average was a 9% decline in performance. So on average, those firms, and they've spent hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of pounds in hiring these people, and they'd have been better off, significantly better off, just not doing that on average.
Relative to firms that did not hire. The performance may have gone up a little bit, but it's less than the equivalent firms that did not hire a star in the same period.
Yeah. So it might be the case that if they hadn't hired a firm, their performance would have gone up more.
Yes.
But then within that, you've got firms where they hired stars into high-performing teams with other stars, and some of those had a positive impact. So presumably, there's quite a lot of firms that are well below that 9% as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, there would be firms that underperformed the 9%. And actually, we also looked at the effect within the firm. So we are going with a relative effect here because it statistically is more sound and the data works a lot more strongly. But we actually have evidence of a decline within the firm. So firms that actually hired underperform their own previous performance. The effect is just not as strong and not as robust statistically. So yes, it seems to be generally bad news, and there are firms that would have done a lot worse than that baseline effect. Yes.
Yeah. And then the other thing that so whenever I've thought about this in the past, it's almost always been through the lens of sales and revenue generation. So bringing in senior big hitters as a way that a lot of boutique consulting firms do, because they want to hire somebody who's going to bring a book of clients with them. They're expecting them to bring in 2, 3, 4 million revenue a year eventually, and often that doesn't work. But I think, if I'm understanding correctly, that what you've seen is more of a just broad-based performance decline. So not just about an inability to bring in new work and grow a practice area, but also to struggles with delivering for existing clients as well.
That is definitely the case. There is definitely a case that the book of business does not shift. So there was a desire, there was a belief that bringing a star brings the clients, but in many cases this is not true. So that is part of the issue. And of course, there's also an issue of declining performance with relation to existing clients. We don't really know the details of how this is experienced, but remember, in professional services firms, often the smoothness, the client cannot judge exactly the quality. Even a sophisticated client cannot entirely judge the quality of what is being delivered. So what they judge is the experience. And actually what you have when you have disruption, you have a less smooth, less integrated, less holistic service. And therefore the client perception of the quality decreases.
Yeah, super interesting. And the team experience as well as part of that. And then that's the disruption that you're talking about.
Yes.
Cool. I'm going to pause on my own questions and just so Mark has asked. He said he's interested to know about the antecedents that you referenced on that final slide, where you said, I think the final bullet was, if I'm just going to read.
The antecedents is just what we presented.
Antecedents. Yeah. Could you just say a bit more about
that? That's just what we presented. Those were the antecedents. So it's the structure, it's the profile of your team, the profile of the team that hires, in terms and the measure we have here is the average score of the team in terms of quality. So how many stars you have and how big those stars are. Now in Chambers, stars are ranked from 1 to 6. So let's say 1 is the top, 6 is the bottom. They're all stars, but they're not all equal. So let's say a team that has several other stars, and these stars have a very high score, they're all 1s or 2s. So that team has a high average in terms of the quality of its components. That team is a lot better at bringing new stars than a team that has a lower quality profile. So it has less stars and weaker stars in it. So that's one of the structural antecedents. A strong team, which means a team that has more stars and better stars, will do better at bringing a new star in. And the second antecedent is the relative standing of that group that hires relative to other groups in the same firm. So you take a law firm, you have capital markets, you have litigation, you have banking and finance, you have intellectual property. These are all groups. And all of these groups have a Chambers score, again, from 1 to 6. This is a score of the group, not of the individuals in the group. If the group that's hiring has a higher score relative to the other groups in the firm, the better is the result. So it seems to do a lot to do with quality. The higher quality you have, however you measure it, the better outcome you have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if I translate that to a consulting firm, for example, that a lot of the kind of the boutique consulting firms that the people on here will be from, maybe we'll have 2, 3, 4, 5 industry lines or capability areas, for example, and maybe a couple of 2 to 5 senior folks in each of those areas. So what I'm understanding from you is, if you're trying to hire somebody, a star into one of those groups, first that group needs to be relatively strong performing versus the others in your organization, and have some of your strongest performers in it. 2, definitely can't be on a downward trend where it's struggling, because the star is not going to fix that. You need to fix other things first. And 3, the star that you bring in needs to be broadly comparable in
Yeah.
capability, expertise, standing, etc., with the people that are in there. They need to see them as it's a peer group, peer who's coming in to bolster us, rather than some celebrity hire that is going to kind of completely change the game.
Yes, and it makes sense because obviously, let's say you had lesser stars, lesser quality. You had, you still have talented people, but not of the same rank of the stars. Of the star who's coming in, they will be jealous, disrupted, anxious. It doesn't mean that we're going to lose our job. It doesn't mean that we will have, less access to resources, whatever it is. Whilst the other one, the one about groups, firms have specialisms. So let's say, going back to the law firms, you could then translate to consultants if you want. But let's say we are a litigation firm mainly, and we do other things. So we are mainly a litigation group. Our litigation group is the strongest. We bring in a top litigation partner. The other groups accept that because we are known as a litigation firm. That's our core capability. Now, if one of the weaker practice areas brings in a top star, then the litigation group, which is stronger, starts to resist. Well, we thought we were a litigation firm. Does this mean that our strategy is going somewhere else? So there is much more acceptance by the other groups if you are strengthening the focal group for which the firm is paying for. Conversely, if you are moving these high resources into weaker groups, then you have much more scope for resistance, if anything, by the stronger groups.
Yeah,
now we don't observe this, of course, but this is what we think is going on.
Yeah, there's so much that's really interesting about the cultural dynamics, and so much hiring that goes on is about people's track record and testing their capabilities, etc. And it's relatively hard and uncommon to really do the cultural fit piece. Delia had a comment in there about how a real star should have the ability to change and not be resistant to that change, part of EQ. So there's almost what are the true characteristics of a star, I suppose. And often I think that those are not necessarily assessed properly in the hiring process.
Well, we didn't talk about this, but yes, there is the problem of adverse selection. There is so much smoke and mirrors in our sector that are stars really stars? Are you really buying a star? That's the other question. Now, we took that for granted. We are assuming that these stars are stars, but there's a very big question on what you're really buying and why is the person moving? Why is this star suddenly leaving a top firm? What's the backstory? Is there something else that's not showing? So there is that broader debate on perhaps we're making the wrong decision here. Perhaps what we are buying is not really a star, which then leads to all sorts of issues. And then the second point that comes from that comment, there is a debate around the dimensions of stars. Now, traditionally, this was all about performance and skill and knowledge. But later on, people have been adding a new dimension, which is helpfulness. So stars are ranked also in relation to their helpfulness, how helpful they are to others, which I would imagine could stretch to cover the point of the question that was being asked. Are they also adaptable? So you could say, yes, the stars, to be truly stars, also need to be adaptable. The reality is that most stars don't tend to be adaptable, for what I was suggesting before. They view themselves as stars. So if you're a star, why should you change?
Yeah. And particularly in this data set with the law firms where they're kind of externally validated as stars, I'm sure that can drive a lot of ego. And equally with consultants, if someone's coming out of a brand name firm where they've had a big client relationships or they've got a strong revenue line that's personally attributed to them and they think it's going to port across, there is a lot of ego that can come across in those situations. And I've certainly seen people come in thinking, oh, all my clients are going to come with me. Like, they love me. They don't love the firm I'm coming from. It's all about me and my relationship. And then the client said, no, actually, we were mostly buying you because you've got a KPMG badge on you. And that's low risk for us. And I've seen that a lot. There's an interesting question here from Milan. In fact, I'm going to see if I can pull this up on screen.
Sure.
So everybody can see it. But so Mladen said, it sounds a bit like building a football team. Bringing in a star only works if the rest of the squad is strong, aligned, and set up to support them, which makes a lot of sense. And then the question is really about whether or not organizations overestimate that readiness. Or maybe the other way of looking at that is like, do they underestimate the work that's necessary to have the right foundations for hiring somebody?
Yeah, the parallel with sport is interesting. I said this right at the beginning. There's a separate debate in sports. Obviously, in sports, this is a massive. If anything, this problem is even bigger when it comes to high-performing football teams, isn't it? And I think some of these things resonate with findings there. There are differences, of course. In football, performance is quite visible. You count how many goals he scored. It's very obvious to say has something worked or hasn't. It's a bit harder in the world of professional services firms. In terms of the signals, in terms of the readiness, one thing we haven't really thought too much about that, but one thing that we did think about, and one thing that because there are the things that we can demonstrate statistically, and there are things that we found in a study that we think are true, but we can't really show them. The one thing that comes up is that a key difference is how engaged, how involved is the practice group in hiring that star. Right. So if a star is foisted on a practice group by senior management, so senior management negotiates over and above the practice group and says, okay, you guys need some new talent here, and parachutes the star hire into the practice group without buy-in, or perhaps against the will of the practice group, now that's very problematic.
Yeah.
However, if the practice group is asking the firm and leading the strategic hiring event, the results are much better. Because the practice group knows the market better, knows who really are stars and who are not, perhaps, who are declining stars, because reputation takes a few years, even negative reputation, but just take a few years. People on the ground know those things better. Also, if they are involved in the process, that means they're ready, and that means they want the new hire, and that means that they think that they can work with them. So that's one thing that we did notice. It's not in a study because we don't have the same level of statistical, it's what we can show in terms of statistical correlations. But that is one thing that actually answers a question that came up quite strong, if anecdotally. So the involvement of the practice group in the hiring event.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It makes a lot of sense. It makes me wonder whether that's one of the things that's contributing to the negative impact in turnaround situations or low-performing teams. Because I suspect that's a situation where it's more likely to be parachuted in. So, we've got a problem in this part of the business. We need to hire somebody in who's going to take it over. And then
absolutely
compounds the challenges that's having. In terms of kind of preparation, one of the things that I've observed, so I used to work at about a 60-person consulting firm that had 5 or 6 partners, and the entire structure of the compensation model there was eat what you kill, and there was very little incentivization for collaboration, and that firm in particular really struggled to hire partners, really struggled to bring people in and have them be effective. And it was almost like someone would come in and they'd say, right, we've got to hire somebody into an area that has zero chance of cannibalizing any of our existing revenue, because that's going to hit me personally in the pocket. And I'm not particularly incentivized to help that person. So they've just got to come in and kind of build their own practice out of nothing. And then coupled with hiring people out of kind of bigger firms who thought clients would come with them. And that whole cultural piece of essentially saying, like, you're here to be kind of adjacent to us, but we're not really bringing you in to help in any kind of broad way, apart from your contribution to the firm profit, which I'll get a share of.
Yeah, I am very, very, very interested in the differences between partnership remuneration models. There's an idea that all partnerships are the same, but they're not. And you were mentioning it, what you call, and obviously the other model is lockstep, at least in law. I don't know whether it has a different name. But the idea that you share profits on the basis of seniority, years served in the firm, and that incentivizes the idea that contribution is not on a yearly basis, but incentivizes contribution over the years. It opens up the possibility for collaboration, but also for moving to management, non-fee earning roles, and so on and so forth. I haven't really thought about this specifically, because we did think at one point, can we classify our 100 firms, whether they're lockstep or whether they're eat what you kill, and whether there was a correlation between the remuneration model and whether the hire was successful or not. But we couldn't really do that because there is no formal record if a firm is lockstep or eat what you kill, especially in the past. There's no official record, and often firms are not purely eat what you kill, and they're not pure locksteps. There's somewhat in between. We did look at the difference between US and American firms, by the way, which a little bit tracks on that. So we would have loved to have findings on this. I assume that you're right in what you're saying, actually. The only one thing I would think is that initially an eat what you kill firm may find it easier to go for a star hire because the star hire would be paid on the basis of the profits that they brought. So if it's somebody that actually from day one shifts new clients, then they pay for themselves, and they don't have to be subsidized by the profits of the broader partner pool. Yeah. But of course, this would only work in a situation in which the new star hire can pay for themselves from day one. Whilst I guess the eat what you kill firm can subsidize and take a longer kind of range.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if it's necessary for them to be selling from day one and bringing clients from day one, you're almost biased towards the stars who believe their own hype a little bit more, and then that can cause some of the other problems that you've identified. Because there's a great Delia said capability versus arrogance, and one of my things that I've observed is that people underestimate how much they were getting from the system they were operating within. And when they lose that system, and this doesn't go just for kind of partners, but anyone moving out of one system into another, they lose all the support of that system, and it's very hard to replicate that and still to be effective. And
yes, I think it's
to rebuild those systems in the new world.
What people refer as main author syndrome, this idea that we are the main authors of our life, when in reality what we do is so much supported, constrained by other structures around us. And this is certainly the case here. The exceptional performance sometimes comes from having a brilliant secretary, junior colleagues that work with you in a very synergistic way, other peers in other departments that refer the work and respect you, systems that you're familiar with, routines, productive routines. I'm speaking of a very low level thing. During COVID, I was very used to working from my office and just working from home. And this is a very low level. All the routines of where I would sit and how I would do and where I would think and so on were all appended and could not be reproduced easily. Imagine this in a case of a star hire where everything is different. So definitely the idea that performance is only individual is definitely a fallacy. And this is why, and we couldn't really test for this that well, but this is why one safer option is to hire all teams, is to hire stars, but they're associates with the stars as well. And we couldn't look at that because we don't have a measure. We haven't looked at the movement of non-stars. But if you move a star with 3 or 4 associates, argument would go that person will have the support structure with them, and the performance should be an easier move. And I think there are some studies that do this. We don't, but I would imagine that I would imagine that to be the case.
I have seen that work very well, actually. So what often doesn't work well is acquiring an entire consulting firm, and often, not always, but often those firms, people get to. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for joining us. People, get to the 2-year earn-out period, etc., and the original firm just kind of disappears and people leave, etc. But when I was at Bain and Company back around 2009, 2010, that sort of time, and Bain London hired the entire oil and gas practice from what was then Booz Allen, and now they were on a non-compete for 18, 24 months, 2 years, I think it was, and that actually set them up for success really well, because it meant that the expectation coming in was not that they were going to contribute revenue from day one, because they were on a non-compete with all of their clients, but because they brought the whole team across, they were able to kind of foster those relationships, lay the groundwork, etc. And that team went to be an incredibly productive part of the Bain London team, because they brought 3 or 4 partners across with some supporting team as well. And they gave them the time. And I wonder whether I'm interested actually in the study, whether the kind of time effect of this you were able to look at. Like,
Yeah,
I can
we
imagine
were.
the negative impact in some cases then turning round into years 2, 3, 4, 5, etc.
Yeah, it dissipates after 4 years. So the
4
negative
years.
impact, the 9% reduction turns neutral after 4 years. Now, most firms don't have 4 years.
Yeah.
You know, most firms buy and pay millions to have an increase in performance, and most cases the partner has a 2-year salary guarantee, and usually if things haven't worked out, that person kind of jumps or skips after 2 years, certainly within a 4 or 5 year period. And not our study, other studies show that most lateral hires move on, not most, sorry, 50% of lateral hires in law move on within a 5-year period. And then you get these serial movers, people that move every 4 or 5 years. And that's a result of the move not working. So it turns positive within 4 years, but in most firms cannot, and most individuals do not want to wait that type of time.
So actually, you've got this pattern of these so-called stars jumping between firms every 4 years, having a negative impact for 4 years, and just at the point where they would have
There's definitely a cohort of serial movers
impact on the next team.
Yeah, there's definitely a cohort of serial movers. But of course, some hires do work. Some hires are neutral, or some people stay on. But there seems to be a cohort of multiple movers every 3 or 4 years. And sometimes there are, we cannot speculate. Sometimes there are genuine reasons. Sometimes the second move works. But we are certainly seeing this in the data. And we have survey studies, Heidi Gardner and people in law, I think she's been published in a book. And she puts down that half of the lateral hires of partners fails, i.e. the partner moves on again within the 5-year period.
Yeah, so you've got a dynamic there where if you're trying to hire senior stars, there's half the time it fails broadly. And that definition of failure is that they move on again within 4 years. Yes. Yeah. And even for the ones where they don't move on, they've only just started to make a net positive contribution after 4 years.
Yes.
Yeah. And I strongly suspect that most firms would say 2 years is the maximum that we're prepared to see underperformance versus expectations. And at that point, and that's what I've seen typically in the past. Actually, a lot of firms feel like they're being quite generous in giving somebody 2 years to build runway.
We've conducted interviews, and it was difficult, but we conducted interviews with people with moves that we weren't expecting to work, but which worked out. So we did find in our database cases of where the move was positive against the grain. And it wasn't that many, but we were able to interview a few. And, listen to the life stories, what worked, what didn't work, why were they an exception, and so on and so forth. And there is no recurrent pattern. Every case is different. In some cases, people were joining a team that they may have worked with 20 years before. So in reality, they were joining colleagues, and there was a strong kind of feeling.
Base level of trust there. Yeah.
Yes, they may have worked somewhere for 5 years earlier and then gone different ways, and then they may be reconnecting after a decade or whatever it was. That was definitely a case. Other cases, they had a lucky win, big client, as perhaps an industry event or regulatory shock or something that meant that particular area of law suddenly became. I think there was a story around antitrust regulation, for instance. Suddenly something happened that made that area much more in demand, and that coincided with a move. Or perhaps a one-off client, big client moving the account. So serendipity. So sometimes it was that. And sometimes we got the impression that if the practice was a supportive practice, one of the most competitive practice, goes a little bit against our hypothesis. Sometimes if it was a supportive practice, a smaller supportive department that did a secondary service, then that would be perhaps easier because maybe there was less expectation, less competition. So we don't really have a clear story, but there are several different aspects that may explain why, in some cases there was more success than should have, or that we would have expected on the basis of our findings.
Yeah. Interesting. So there are ways of bucking the trend, as it were. I wonder, we might have some people on who have recently moved firms themselves as senior hires and are kind of looking to be successful. And I know we're probably going to go beyond the limits of your academic research in this, but I'm just interested in the perspectives on it. Like if if someone's sitting there like about to join or has recently joined a senior team, like what are the things that they can do to maximize their chance of success?
Yes, happy to speculate, because we don't have direct data on this, but we have read the literature, so we've read what others say. Again, it's in law. But apparently one key marker of success is if the new person joining the firm shares within the first, I can't remember what it is, let's say 6 months, but it's a short period of time, shares a project with the new colleagues, and the new colleagues share a project with the new incoming staff. So if that happens within, I think, I can't remember if it's 6 weeks or 6 months, but if that happens within a relatively short period of time from the move, and it's in both ways. So the new person brings in a new lead that leads to a new project involving people in the firm already, and vice versa. They are brought in an existing project by the new colleagues. Then that seems to have a very strong correlation with a positive move, and it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, in many ways, that's the characteristic of like, I'm joining to be part of a team and to share and to benefit you all, as opposed to I'm coming in with ego and I'm going to change everything.
Yes, and some we didn't really hone in on this, but some firms run really sophisticated induction programs. The loads of people in the firm would be the new hire. I would still think that having the group really involved in the selection and recruitment process, so the team that's recruiting, having that involved in the process as much as you can, is probably the single biggest thing that the firm can do. And then moving on, having a protracted period of induction, socialization, things that lead to that outcome that I was describing, that brings people together and leads them to share contacts, leads, projects from day one, and also on the social level. Now, these are things that all firms do: induction, socialization. We perhaps don't do it for senior people as much, actually. We definitely do it for junior people. Perhaps the argument here is it's even more important for senior people, actually. Well, senior people are expected to know these ropes already, to fit in, to swim, and thrown at the deep end and just to get on with it. But actually, counterintuitively somehow, it indicates that if there is a need of really targeted, expensive socialization and induction, it should really be in the case of Starlight.
And you know, that speaks to the kind of the blind spot that I referenced at the start of only thinking about this through the lens of the performance of the individual. And if you said, so you might say, well, this individual's coming in, they're experienced, they're capable, they're clearly going to pick stuff up. We don't need to spend a load of time in embedding them. They're going to do that naturally. And all of that is thinking through the lens of that individual and what they might need. And what you're saying, and like what's come through really strongly in this research for me, is the need to think from the team's perspective of how they're going to feel and react to this person coming in. So you take, for example, like the situation of an underperforming team or a turnaround situation where you might say, right, we need to add something into this team to make it work. That situation in particular, if you just say we're going to parachute somebody in and they're going to fix this, like you need to be really engaged closely with those people who are already feeling pretty down and negative and insecure because they're not hitting their numbers, they're getting poor feedback from clients, they're poor performance ratings, whatever it is. To spend time with those people to say, like, we want you to be successful, we want this team to be successful, what's needed, help them realize that they need to bring somebody in and support that person coming in.
Well, it's a vicious cycle, because the underperforming team will be under strain. The productive routines will have probably collapsed in many ways. Things are not working as smoothly. Clients really judge things on the experience of the service as much as the content and quality of the service in many ways, because outcomes are quite difficult to prove in many areas. So all of these things are self-reinforcing. Other groups in a firm, if you take a law firm, may not refer clients to a group that's in trouble, because they'll think, I'm in the tax department. I could refer this person to the capital markets department, let's say, but I know that they are in a bit of a downward spiral that would damage me. So the cross referrals don't come in as much, so the groups withdraw collaboration, and then you bring in a new person, so that is even more disruption, because whatever routines you had come even more on the strain, because the new person doesn't fit, doesn't know them, doesn't fit or doesn't want to fit in them. And plus you got this anxiety feeling, Does this mean that there is a rival means I'm going to lose my job? So you're getting this vicious cycle, which is the opposite of a virtuous cycle, which you get in a situation of a strong team with many stars, which is already one of the best in the firm and which is performing.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've got this emerging theory with a few firms that I'm kind of working with from a sales perspective of the challenges of internal referrals. So like a partner introducing another partner to their client, which you referenced there. And I actually think it's the most difficult type of referral because you're jeopardizing, you're putting at risk your client relationship, which is typically you've got 5 to 10 of these relationships at any one time that are super important to you. You're putting that at risk. You're naturally vouching for this colleague that you're introducing, which is higher risk than introducing a third-party firm that you're less responsible for. And we see it with acquisitions when firms get acquired and they expect that there's going to be all this revenue synergy, and it's really hard to make that real because of that resistance to refer across. And in this situation, the context we're talking about is when a new hire comes in and you want to have that quick sharing of clients and collaboration on projects and things. There's a real barrier there for a lot of people, I think.
Yes,
that overcoming.
That is definitely one of the dynamics behind our last hypothesis. So when one of the strongest groups takes in a star, the other groups in a firm know that group can handle the new arrival. So they know that is a high-performing group, often by definition of being one of the better one in the organization, already has many of the stars, although the two things are not necessarily connected. We are using two different variables to measure quality here, but generally. So the other groups know that if a star arrives in one of the top groups, that group can handle the new recruit, can socialize a new person, routines will hold, the group will perform. So therefore, they continue to handle referrals into the group. Now, of course, the issue arises that when a weaker group takes in a new star, there's much more disruption, and therefore the other groups suspend cross referrals because they don't want to be embarrassed, they don't want to run the risk, they don't want to lose a client, or even run the potential risk of running a client because something that a disrupted group does. So that is definitely behind our thinking, the idea of cross referrals.
Interesting. We're basically out of time. That's flown by. I think there's a final slide for us to pull up. Is there? There we go. Yeah. So thank you to everyone who joined. The QR code here will just take you through to our free content. Essentially, the Skilled Consultant is our blog that we put out every week. Thank you all for joining, particularly those that commented and got involved in the questions. We went live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and X simultaneously, which we've never done before. And as far as I can tell, that's worked all right. Daniel, any kind of big thank you to you? Have you got like one final bit of tip for anybody who's thinking about hiring a star? Like what the number one thing they should think about?
Well, hiring a star is risky. You've got to it always carries both risks and benefits, and you've got to find ways of reducing the risks, i.e. the disruption, and maximizing the upside, i.e. the synergy. This will depend on the antecedents I discussed here. There are some cases in which it will be a lot easier, but there are still steps that you can take to boost your success. So I guess the message is, do not lead to the conclusion that you should never hire stars, but it's something that has to be handled with care. And I hope that what we discussed here helps with that strategy.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Great to have the conversation with you, Daniel. Could have kept going for a while, but
yes,
we'll do a round 2 at some point.
Time flies.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining. And we'll chat soon. Take care.
Many thanks. Bye bye.